The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Our Town, the spring 1992 production of the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, is a perennial favorite with theater goers. John Cranney, the company's artistic director, and Gary Gisselman, director of Our Town and associate artistic director of the company, are here today to talk about what makes this play a great American classic. John, Gary, it's a pleasure to have you on All About Kids today. We'll be talking about the Children's Theater Company and, in particular, your current production, spring of 1992, Our Town. Now, Our Town is one of those plays that everybody recognizes the title, and I think sometimes think, that old chestnut? But I love the comment in the Star and Tribune review that even if you've seen it 100 times, go. It's a wonderful production. I reread it, and it is wonderful. Why did you choose Our Town?
Actually, it was chosen before I came to direct it, and Dan should probably answer that.
Well, one of the reasons I chose it is exactly what you were just referring to, is that it's a play that actually has a bad reputation, especially amongst theater professionals, but I think also generally amongst the population. Not that it's a bad play or anything, but that it's so often done by high schools and community groups who do it, I'm sure, earnestly and as well as they can. But it is actually a very, very difficult piece to do. And I've always felt that it was one of the great American plays. And I felt I had an opportunity, a chance to do it here. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is that it is a play that deals with the human condition. It deals with growing up. It deals with the cycles of life. And it especially deals with family. How families work, how they relate to each other, and what happens in the process of growing up, which of course is what the children's theater is somewhat about. The whole process of growing up is a very important thing to us, and so I felt it was a very timely play. There is a third reason, and that's that over the past several years, in an expansion and a growing of our artistic reach, so to speak, in our service to the community, I felt it's important that there are certain plays which exist. Most of the time what we do in our work are adaptions of books or original stories or so forth. But there are many plays which I think are accessible to young people, even to children, and should be done for them. And so as you refer to it as a chestnut, which it is, and it's kind of a wonderfully warm term, that term chestnut, but in a way it is a classic, and I feel that the opportunity to be able to see this play, to experience the life that's in it, but also to experience its theatricality too, because it was done in for its time in a kind of revolutionary way. So those are the reasons we chose it.
I think you've done some things, Gary, as director, that make the play a little bit more accessible for children. You have a child off to the side that's kind of watching.
Yeah, I guess it was to make it accessible. It was more to remind people that children watch plays, and at the end there's a little boy that comes to when his father returns to the cemetery at the end. And it's the same thing, that people often forget that there are little children around all of these events of our lives. You know, the kids get kind of shunted off sometime, but they're there and they see everything. And there's a great lyric in Stephen one of the songs from Into the Woods by Sondheim, where he says, "Be careful what you say, children will listen. Be careful what you do, children will see and learn." And I think that that's true, and we often forget that they're around at all of these events.
And I think maybe we worry more about protecting children from live theater, perhaps, or the classics, thinking they won't be interested, when kids at a very young age are watching incredible stuff on television that doesn't have nearly the depth that a play like Our Town does.
You know, I've been in the theater for many years, and I have not done children's theater for all that long, but I have done it for a considerable amount of time now, the past 8 years. And certain truths kind of keep resurfacing in your work. And one of the truths about theater is that human behavior is compelling. That if what you see on the stage, as what you read in a book, represents true life, the struggles and the joys and the trials of people that you can relate to, that's a very compelling and very powerful thing. And even young people, because young people indeed are people, they're little persons, can relate to that on their own level and take from it what their experience will allow them to take, but they do know about family, about father and son, about mother and daughter, about brother and sister. And we try and find in everything we do, we try and find that kernel, that spark that's really important to some fundamental human spiritual need. I often use Raggedy Ann and Andy as an example. There are many things that one could do in producing a stage version of Raggedy Ann and Andy, but Connie and I fixated on the issue of sibling rivalry, which isn't all that much noticeable as you watch the play because it's all a lot of fun. But essentially what drives the plot is Marcella's fear that the new baby that's coming into her house is going to change her life drastically. And so we constantly look for those life-affirming, life-understanding issues in what we do. And our town has that in spades. It is really a wonderful piece from that point of view.
Well, it's a very universal sort of thing. Before the program started, we were talking a little bit about that, and you talked about Wilder writing this play so long ago, I think 1937
Yeah.
it was produced, when the nuclear family was just that. Everybody was married practically. Everyone had the requisite number of children. And our society has changed so dramatically, but yet, in your opinion, this play still speaks to that family that is no longer the family that Wilder was writing about.
Well, it speaks about different things, too, I think. Grover's Corners does not exist anymore, you know, if it did exist. And it probably did, in one way or another, especially before there were automobiles and when it could be that isolated. But what does still exist are the connections. So you look at a neighborhood, and how does a neighborhood become our town, you know, and what are the connections? Are there people watching out for your kids? And even those things don't happen, and those are those kinds of connections I think are so valuable and important, and that we should be building up those connections. So when we started to work on the show and started to talk about the show, we met with a number of the community leaders. George Latimer had put together a number of people for us to talk to. And we had a couple of Saturday sessions, and those are the things that they talked about, was the lack of connections in neighborhoods now, and who do you go to, who helps you, who watches out for children and for everyone. And so that the principles that are in our town are still the same. The family has changed enormously. But it's been changing, you know, it was probably changed in 1938.
Well, sure. And it changed within the course of the play, too.
Because the
Lots of
play
things
goes
that
back to
happened.
1901 or 1899, actually, and up to 1914. And so when we just think about what happened to the whole world after, just in the First World War,
Well,
was
and
enormous.
that brings out to the character who was just alluded to in the play, who ultimately dies during the war, and his brilliant career as an engineer.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's been a fundamental change in our society in this 100 years or so that we've spanned from the time the play is set, not the time Wilder wrote it, but the time the play is set. And we've gone from being an agrarian society in which the family was a kind of economic unit, and which children had a very principal role in economic survival to a different kind of unit, so to speak, now, where that isn't necessarily a part of what keeps a family together or you know, provides a focus in it.
But it's the tie. There are ties that bind, and that kind of comes.
You know, and that's
across.
why it's interesting. The play then should be dated, but it's not. It still has even a more poignant sense of message because. Essentially, as Gary has said many times in the process of doing this play is about paying attention. It's about, it's about, you know, seeing what is there for you and understanding and appreciating that now before it's too late.
Technically, it's rather a departure for Children's Theater Company. Ordinarily, you are lavish, spectacular. Children anticipate, and adults anticipate the magic that's going to happen.
Right.
And this, of course, is very spare. And that is the way Wilder wrote it. You did bring some slides today. Let's take a
All right.
look at those
Yeah.
and talk a little bit about how you worked in this particular
happy
kind of
to.
staging.
Here you see the evening scene of the first act. As you said, there's not very much scenery. Wilder wrote this play to be played on almost a bare stage, which is a revolutionary idea for the middle of the 20th century, but not terribly revolutionary for the history of theater, because in the great periods of the history of theater, the Greeks and Shakespeare, they also played mostly on a bare stage. So the very simplest of things, a church window in the back and two ladders that represent the upstairs of both of the houses are used to indicate the bare necessities of locale. In trying to get at the life behind the physical world that we live in, I think Wilder hit on a great idea, to strip away all of the details which distract us, the wallpaper and use only the bare necessities of a table and a chair, and get to the life and the people and the souls of the people involved in the story. This is a slide from the end of the play, where Emily has gone back to Grover's Corners
After she
had died, and realizes how much of life as we live we miss.
And that's kind of the whole theme of the play, to appreciate or enjoy and value what you have today, no matter how ordinary it seems.
I think it
Absolutely.
is. I think that's one of them. I think that now this is a great. So this is in the graveyard scene, and John won't tell you, but I will tell you that that's Catherine Farron in the center, and Catherine and John are married. And Catherine and I and John have really worked together for 20, 25 years now. And one of the early plays that I did at Chanhassen, both John and Catherine went and played the lead and played husband and wife, though they were not married to each other then. And Catherine's just wonderful in the third act of this as Mrs. Gibbs, and really is the center of it. And there she is again with
Well,
Claude
actually,
Lund.
the play has been sort of a reunion for a number of people who've worked together
lot
on
of
and
us.
off in the past.
A lot of us.
There's-
Clyde I've worked with for 20 years.
As F. High, and
Yeah.
and also Charity Jones, who plays Emily, plays Cinderella now, and Sarah Harris, who plays Emily's mother, was the first Cinderella, or one of the first Cinderellas, used to play that role, and now plays Emily's mother.
It was so funny because when we were, Wendy Lair, the other associate artistic director, we were going through some slides of the old days at the Children's Theatre, and she suddenly showed me a slide of Alice and the White Rabbit, and it was Mr. and Mrs. Webb. It
And
was
there they are.
Sarah as Alice and Jerry,
there they
who's
are,
in the
Jerry-
center
Jerry
here.
and Charity Jones.
Yeah, and so it was
Do you
very,
think that
very
that
strange.
familiarity, having worked with each other in the past, has
Oh,
helped make the play work
Absolutely.
much more?
It was interesting when you said that usually the Children's Theatre does such lavish productions, and that's true. But I think that the reason that I was so attracted and eager to come back when and join John at the Children's Theatre Company was that the one thing that's always been true
Oh, that
about the
was a long
Children's
slide.
Theatre Company is that they do the very best. The children deserve the best, and they do the very best work. So in this case, we have a great group of actors, which this play requires more than scenery, and the language is dealt with very well, and so that those qualities became important for this play.
John, as artistic director of the company, you've really sort of stepped out of your real role into the role of the stage manager in this play.
As an actor?
Yes, as an actor.
Well, I think that if there's, as you go along in the theater, there's one thing you learn, that the real role is that of the actors. That's where it really happens. And I started in the theater, as most people do, as an actor, and it is something that I feel comfortable doing, and probably could have been an actor, but wanted to do more. I sometimes say I got bored, and so it's very important for me to do this occasionally, to just remind myself but also to just get back in touch with the fundamental aspect of that one-to-one relationship with the audience.
Well, and you really do have it, because much of the
Yeah.
time you're talking directly to the audience.
Well, it's an
And
interesting part to play, because I discovered in the middle of rehearsal that I do one play and the other actors do another, in a sense, because the stage manager comes on and you know, furthers the action, but is very little involved with the rest of the characters. There's
He
only
does.
two
He
scenes.
represents sort of the spirit of the town, though. He
Yeah.
represents very much the spirit of Grover's Corners all the way through. He's sort of like a Greek chorus at times, and you know, and
Yeah.
he performs a number of functions. It's a great role for John. And what's wonderful is John is so big, and he fills that stage up. He has great presence in it, and I think it's. Connie Congdon just saw the show the other night. She's in town working on another production, Beauty and the Beast, and she just said that John's presence up there is so wonderful, and it is. And it's really
it must have
wonderful
been
to
an
see him.
interesting experience for you to direct
Well,
John.
actually,
and
one of our
just-
first experiences together was in that relationship. And so we've worked together in so many different ways together. When I was in Arizona, John was down as associate artistic director. Now I'm up here as associate artistic director to John, you know, so we keep just working
Reversing
together
the
over.
roles
Yeah, and it's terrific. It's very comfortable.
What is real life and what is theater? How does it feel to be out there with the audience looking at you as?
Well,
actor?
you know, it's a big responsibility, because you know, it's an important role, it's a big role, but it actually feels very comfortable, and as I said, it's getting me back in touch with the immediacy of what theater is, and that's a special thing about live theater, you know, that is special now, you know, and the time that even Wilder wrote this, certainly in the time again it's set. Live performance was the norm. We had no media performance in 1901 to speak of, and so, but that's completely reversed now. All the children now grow up seeing media performance, in other words, film or television.
And it's
or,
been
you
edited
know,
and re-edited until the
re-edited, and it's not
perfection
there.
of the moment.
It's
right?
not in the room with them at the moment. And so that's a wonderfully, I think, a wonderful thing that has actually happened to theater is the fact that it's been rarefied in a way by being very special. So you got to go someplace to do it. You got to see it. You got to participate in it in a very active way. Whereas, you know, you can go see a film or rent it. It doesn't matter. You know.
That's why I think the stage and the way children's theater mounts all these productions it's terribly impressive to children. And when you come out afterwards, do you do that in this play? Do the actors come out and talk to the audience the way you often do?
There are demonstrations after some of the productions. It depends on the school shows. And there are always interesting questions. We've had one school that came down from northern Minnesota that had just done our town 2 weeks before, so they came to see this production, and they were a terrific audience and very moved by it. And it was so fun to have them come up and say, "I played Emily and I played Mr. Gibbs," and it was a terrific experience with them. So
Well, they probably
I get
it
that.
had become part of them, so
Oh,
seeing it
absolutely.
on stage
Yeah.
oh, absolutely.
expanded their
And
own
they had questions about how
experience.
did you solve this and how come you did this, and you know,
Yeah.
it was great fun.
That is, you should have done a whole opening night performance for everyone who had acted in our
I don't think
town
we just
over
have
all
room
these
in
years.
it.
That would be an interesting thing to do, yeah.
Well, you talked a little bit about your experience working with John before. Gary, you are a hometown person. You were born and grew up in Bloomington,
I did.
and very active in the early days of Bloomington Civic Theater, which wasn't that long ago, actually.
No, well, actually, it was, I guess. Yes, my grandparents homesteaded in Bloomington in 1910, and so I grew up there, and they had a strawberry farm, and my grandparents ran the cemetery, the Bloomington Cemetery for many years. My grandfather was the sexton, or the gravedigger. And it's terrific when I started to tell my kids stories. You know, there's about 9 or 10 they want you to tell stories about when you were their age so that they know that they may grow to be older sometime. And when I told them stories about my grandfather, the gravedigger, and then he lost his left arm in a sawmill in Wisconsin when he was 19. So not only was he was a gravedigger with a hook on his left arm. Now, when you come to see the play, you will see that in the third act there's an undertaker, and the undertaker has a hook on his left arm. And so there will be very few people that know who that is, but for me it's my grandfather. And my cousin came to see the show, and who also had been close to my grandfather, and he was very surprised by it and
Well,
taken
it's
by it.
those things from your own personal life. And
So there's a lot of my
actually,
personal life
Bloomington
in this show, I
old,
think.
in the old days was not unlike Grover's Corners, kind
Well,
of a
it was
rural
not as
area,
isolated
just-
as Grover's Corners,
but
but other
still.
than that, it was very much that rural, and there was that kind of community participation.
But
and-
directing it helped you get in touch with your roots again?
It
Maybe
did.
I don't want to put words
Well, no, it
into your...
definitely did. No, it definitely did. And I think it's very much about my family in a way, and the communication and the support that I felt growing up from the whole town.
Well, again,
in a way.
emphasizing what John said about the universality, no matter
Yeah.
where you grew up or...
And John
what
is
time
from a
period.
small town in Utah as well.
I was born in Utah, but I actually grew up in a quite a small town, not much larger than Grover's Corners, way up in the mountains in southern Idaho.
Idaho, that's right.
So I did experience through my growing up years what it was like to be in a small town, and many of the things that Wilder refers to, I understand. You know, people's position in the town and how they relate to each other and how they look down on each other, up at each other, or
Yes.
whatever, you know, is
It's sort of
all
the
part of that.
innocence, the whole gossip in the play
Yeah.
is so terribly innocent.
Well, it is
you know,
innocent, but it's and it's gone, you know, in a way, and that's one of the things about it. It's not just a nostalgia piece. It's about a period of time which we can learn from, rather than say, "Oh gosh, I wish it were like that again," because it won't be, and it's not going to be. And I think that's a power of the play. I don't mean that as a sad part of the play. You know, it deals so much with time. The element of time in the show is very interesting because there's a linear concept of time in it, of people getting born and growing up and getting married and growing old and dying. And then there's also that great sense of the cycles of time, because we're very much aware of the seasons, and we're very much aware of the cycles of people's lives, and we're very much aware of the fact that we start in the morning and end in the evening, you know, all of the cycles that we're familiar with. And then there's a character in the play, Professor Willard from the State University, that comes in and talks about what is now known as deep time, which is geological time, and that the land that Grover's Corners on is 200 million years old, as he talks about it, you know. And so you have that great sense of time. And then at one point in the play, the stage manager comes out and he's talking about that they're now putting they're building a new bank in town, and they're putting in the cornerstone, they're going to put a time capsule and put things from the town in there. And in fact, stage manager talks about what they should be putting. You should have
Maybe I
time to
should
do that.
I should do
Yeah,
that,
do
right?
Okay.
If I can remember it here on television. I don't know.
It's a
Well,
great
I have a
speech.
copy of the play right here.
Okay, you can promise. Yeah, it's a great speech. He comes out and he talks about filling in the details, and this is where he, in the earlier section, as Gary talks about, it's the scientific account, and this is more about the history of how it fits in the grander scheme of human. And he comes and he talks about. He turns to the audience and he says, "I think this would be a good time to tell you about." The Cartwright interests have just begun building a new bank in Grover's Corners. Had to go to Vermont for the marble, sorry to say. And ask a friend of mine what they should put in the cornerstone for people to dig up 1,000 years from now. Well, they put in a copy of the New York Times and a copy of Editor Webb's Sentinel. Yeah, we're kind of interested in this because some scientific fellows discovered a way to paint all of that reading matter with a kind of glue, silicate glue. That'll make it keep 1,000, 2,000 years. They were putting in a copy of the Bible, the Constitution of the United States, and a copy of William Shakespeare's plays. But what do you say, folks? What do you think? You know, Babylon once had 2 million people in it, and all we know about them is the names of the kings and some copies of wheat contracts and contracts for the sale of slaves. Yet every night all those families sat down to supper. The father come home from his work and the smoke went up the chimney, same as here. Even in Greece and Rome, all we know about the real life of the peoples, well, we can piece together from the joking poems and the plays they wrote for the theater back then. So, I'm going to have a copy of this play put in the cornerstone so that people 1,000 years from now will know a few simple facts about us. More on the Treaty of Versailles or the Lindbergh flight. You see what I mean? So, people 1,000 years from now. This is the way we were in the provinces north of New York at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is the way we were in our growing up, in our marrying, in our living, and in our dying.
And then the chorus comes in with "Blessed be the tie that binds," you know. So it just kind of puts it all together. And yeah, that's what. does so well.
It is a timeless play. It's something for
Well, I
all
think it's
of us
very
to see.
American. You know, there was a production done last year in England. Alan Alda played the stage manager, and of course everyone knows Alan Alda in England from MASH. But the reviews were respectful, but they kept saying, this is a great play in America. We're not sure why, but it's we know that it is a very popular and great play. So I think there's something in the play that is extremely American.
It's all right. There's a strong sense of duty that comes through in the play, too. We've only got a couple of minutes left. I hate to give up talking about this because I was Emily, too. You know, we could go on for a long time.
Well, we want you to do one of Emily's speeches then for us.
I would need you to prompt me. Let's talk a little bit about the direction you're going to the next season, 93. I know you're not quite ready to reveal what it's going to be, but you're going to continue.
No, but there is something that we were talking about earlier, and it's a point that I'd like to make. This is a perfectly wonderful forum in which to do it, and I mentioned it earlier. It's the need I felt for some time to include great works of literature in what we do, great works of dramatic literature, and so I think that we'll continue to do that. Literature is something that's very important to us at the Children's Theatre. Not only popular children's fare, but the great classics, and we've always prided ourselves on interpreting those classics in a very authoritarian and I don't know if authoritarian is exactly the right word, but authentic, I think, is the word I was looking for.
Great integrity.
With great integrity and faithfulness to the spirit of the work as literature. And that's very important to us. That's one of the philosophical tenets of what we've
Well, it goes back to that idea of quality. Children are able to understand
And good language.
many things.
Yes.
You know, Thornton Wilder writes so well.
Absolutely, and that's another reason why I wanted to do the plays, the dramatic classics, because for the most part they have survived because of the language in them. Shakespeare, of course, and we did Shakespeare last year, and we're looking to do Molière, and we're looking to do other American playwrights of contemporary ilk and so forth. So,
What about funding? Budget cuts affecting?
well.
No, I don't want to end on a depressing note. Maybe
It's
we
not a
gotta-
depressing note. Well, we have to understand that in our community here in the Twin Cities and Minnesota, we are in abundance of riches, but we also live in difficult times. We know that in many ways, and that's not just only our current recessionary times, but there are great needs for libraries, but also for theaters and for social programs and so forth. And constantly we face the same struggles as others in getting people to support us and finding appropriate level of support, and still make what we do available to everyone.
And that's
the
important, and
hard
I think
part.
that's why you've
Yeah.
been so successful.
Well, it's a matter of keeping them alive and then giving them something to live for. And so
Exactly.
we all
You
fit
have
in.
to have it all.
Right.
Food and culture. John and Gary, thank you very much for being with
Thank
us
you,
today.
Gretchen.
Thank you.
Thank you, John Cranney and Gary Gisselman, for joining us on All About Kids. And thanks to all of you. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency. We thank you for watching, and we hope you visit your public library often.